This video on problem solving. So if you've watched a number of the other videos, say the How Anger Works or the Cycle of Abuse, you will remember that there were a whole bunch of little X's, right? And these X's are part of the build-up phase, or they are part of the pre-escalation phase. And so we need to actually be able to solve those problems, or they retain the stress in our lives and kind of create all sorts of problems. And so one of the things that I've found happens a lot in relationships, that go sideways, and where harm happens in relationships, or frankly they're just very unsatisfying, is problems go unsolved. And this happens over years, and so significant challenges occur. And if you don't solve a problem, especially a problem that involves getting hurt, then you're essentially building a very unhealthy, unhappy relationship. And so the capacity to problem solve, whether at business or at home or just in the grocery store, is really, really important. So I'm just going to walk you through kind of the steps that I suggest and that we suggest to follow. And this isn't rocket science. There's lots of kind of problem-solving steps out there in the world. This is the one we use. If you've got a different one, feel free to use that one. The key here is simply to problem solve, to actually resolve what's going on, so that the tension or the unhappiness or the unsolved problem actually can go away. So what's the first thing? Well, you may have heard that a problem defined is a problem half solved. And that's partly true simply because we need to remember that any problem is a shared problem, right? So if you look back into your life and into actually the last few solutions that you've created, you've probably created those solutions over the definition of the problem in your own head, right? So you saw something happen, you think, oh, well, if they just did this or if they just did that, then everything would be okay, right? So we're solving what's often a very simplified problem in our own head. And the problem with that is that's actually not the problem, right? The problem is whatever is shared between the people that are participating in the problem. So if it's a problem at home, then it's probably a shared problem with your spouse, or with a child, or frankly with everybody in the house, right? There, an example again is, who makes dinner, or who vacuums, or who plugged the toilet, right? All of those sorts of things sit in that kind of shared space, and so it's a shared problem. And the challenge that often happens for people here is that they may not agree with or understand the other person's perspective on the problem. So, that's okay. It's okay if we don't understand what the other person is saying. It's okay if we don't agree with their definition. What is not okay is if we then say that their perspective, their experience doesn't matter, right? So when we solve the problem, we don't have to take their perspective into account. And that is just a ginormous problem, because what it means is you're solving the problem from your perspective and nobody else's, which means the solution will be terrible, right? The odds that it will meet the needs of everybody in the room is very, very low. And in fact, a lot of our problems come when we think we're right? We have the right problem, we have the right understanding, we have the right solution. And I'd like you to throw that idea out, because if it's not a shared problem, then it's not the right problem. Just flat out. Because in any long-term relationship, if it's not a shared problem, then you're solving the wrong problem every time. And what you'll find is, and this is exactly why in the build-up phase or in the escalation phase of a relationship, of a problem, is because there's just not this shared problem solving, because we're creating solutions that don't work. And then we're not thinking about them, right? They should work. Why aren't they working? Well, they should, right? And that shoulding is just terrible. Let's not should on each other. Let's could on each other, right? We could solve the problem if we do have a shared understanding of it. So that's the first thing. So this, believe it or not, can take up to or more than, so kind of greater than 50% of the time. Right? This is that you actually need to invest time and energy in this, because the minute you involve more than two people or more than one person in a problem, you're going to start having a more complicated problem, because not only do I need to meet my needs and my expectations, I need to meet theirs as well. And so that, that means that we actually need to talk for a while. We need to listen, and that's one of the reasons why we teach listening first, is because we need to create the capacity to even understand what this is. Right? So if we can understand what's going on for a partner, then we can create a shared problem. So what then happens is that we move into a discovery process, and we're discovering options. Right? We're actually engaging in a process where we go, okay, so let's see if we understand our problem well enough, to come up with some options. So notice we're not talking about solutions here, we're not even talking about potential solutions. We are talking about options, right? What's possible, or even, what ideas can we come up? This is kind of a brainstorming thing. Right, where we go through and we say, oh, well, we could try this, and we could try that, and maybe we could try this other thing. And what this does is then teaches us whether we actually understand our shared problem or not. Right? So what happens is these are actually buddies, these two. Right? They get along because they are busy talking back and forth to each other. Because what a good option will do is it will teach you about your shared problem. And as you discuss the option, you may discover that you didn't define the problem well enough, right? There's a question you haven't asked, maybe there's some homework you need to do, and so you've got to go out and kind of figure out what's going on there. Once you've done this, and this can take quite a while actually, and it's okay if it takes a while, because most deadlines are artificial. Most timelines are not as real as we think they are, because humans made them up and we can change them if we need to. Yeah, there are some things which are unflexible and determined by others, but most of what happens in the home is kind of decided by who runs the home, who's in the home, who participates in the home. And so you need to remember that you can actually take your time in this phase. We can let go of this anxiety that we have to solve it. We can actually probably have been living with the problem for a while. We can live with it a bit longer while we try to figure it out, right? So this whole kind of back and forth piece can be the bulk of your time trying to solve a problem. What comes is once you've kind of done this enough, and of course the more important the problem, the more you want to put time and energy into this. So a really unimportant problem can take very little time at all once you're in the practice of this. But longer, more expensive problems need to have, just frankly more time. And so what eventually happens is you kind of create a shared solution, right? So finally, right? Here we've been talking for days and weeks or whatever, and now we're finally at the solution phase. Now the joy of this piece is if you do this well, this is easy, right? If you take your time here, this actually doesn't become the hard part. Now most people think, oh, coming to a solution with that problem is so hard. Well, probably because you've skipped these stages, right? You've just basically trying to convince them that your definition of the problem is the right one, right? And they're trying to do the same with you, and you fight about the solution. If instead you start here, work here, and go back and forth as much as you need, you'll find that a solution will simply present itself. And at this point, you need to kind of get into details, right? Into what are known as action points, right? Who is doing what and when, right? So what is getting done? When is it getting done? And who is doing it? These are, just some of the details that you can put down even on a piece of paper, if this is kind of like your first few times going through this, might not be bad to document it. But certainly if you're doing an important deal or an important relationship shift, documenting might actually be a good thing because it helps build accountability and helps build trust, right? So later on, you may discover that you misunderstood what they meant by something, or you misunderstood the timing. And so if we take the time to write this down and figure this out, then you will find that in fact it's more likely to get done the way people expect it to. And again, the more important it is, the more likely you're going to want to write that down. So stage 1 is this define shared solutions. Stage 2 is discover options. Stage 3 is to create the shared solution. Stage 4 is the action, right? You do it. And you do what you say you're going to do, right? So whatever you've identified as being your role at this point, you do down here, right? And at this point, if you've done these pieces well, this is again even easier because everybody is experiencing some sort of mutual benefit. Because that's actually the point of a shared solution, right? Again, shared. Why would I work on this solution if there was nothing in it for me? Right? If it's your problem that we're solving, then what's in it for me to solve it for you? But if it's our problem and I share a piece of that with you, then I am much more likely to do this because there's some sort of benefit for me, right? We want our solutions to flow. We want them to kind of go into the day with not a lot of barriers to action. And one of the barriers for action can be this resentment that we weren't considered here. We were just handed a solution and so then we've got to go do it, right? So in a easily flowing kind of power with relationship, this is going to be very easy because of this process that happened before. And this is a power with process, right? This is a collaborative process. You are doing power with as you go through here because you are going to wait until you get permission to go to shared solution, right? That's what that shared piece is that permission that yes, we all agree that this problem is defined in a way that's shared. It's part of me is in there. And the options that we've talked about have, seemed interesting enough that we've been able to come out with a shared solution. And then, of course, we go out and do it. Now, if your life is like mine, not all solutions go well. Even if you actually go through this process, you may actually find that the solution doesn't work, right? And that's one of the neat things about this isn't a one-stop shop. It's not like if you don't solve it here, it's over, right? That's it. We give up, we go home, it's done. No, what happens is you have this reflection point that allows you to assess the quality of the solution and the process, right? So when you're doing this, you are assessing the solution. Did it work? Did people do what they said they were going to do? Did it have the outcomes we were hoping for? And how did that go? This whole thing, right? How did that land? Were people, at the end of it, now that we're thinking about it, did people really feel like it was shared? Were they happy with the options, or were there some options that weren't considered, right? Was it harder to do than they thought it was going to be? Right, so, this is kind of that point at which you can say, did the solution work? Did the process work? And when we think about this whole process as not some linear thing, but in fact something that happens in a circle, right? And we're just constantly refining solutions over time. And this is actually one of the joys of being in a long-term relationship, is that you get to actually go around this cycle so many times with so many different kinds of problems that it's actually gets easier and easier, and you're refining the solutions as opposed to coming up with new ones. Right? Now, of course, in long-term relationships, new problems come up all the time, right? When your kids go from stay-at-home to going to school, right? That's a shift in potential responsibilities at home. When they go from being in school to working, but still living at home, that's another, right? And so you're just constantly having to kind of walk through these sorts of things, and there will be some problems that are harder to solve and may take years to figure out simply because they're complicated and the solution just simply takes a long time to work out because it's a deep problem, right? So, significant health issues, significant employment issues, significant relationship challenges, right? These sorts of things take time, and there's a bunch of stages. So it's okay if it takes a long time, but this also works for the little stuff like who's doing the dishes and who's going to drive Johnny to school and all those sorts of things. So this works regardless of what context you put it in. And I would encourage you to start at home when you think about this, because this is where it matters the most. These are the most important long-term relationships you have. Try to slow things down in making decisions. Slow it down so that you have time for this. Yes, it does slow it down, and that's okay. Our relationships tend to barrel from bad solution to bad solution. Let's slow it down. Let's find out what works for everybody. So we're going to pause on this image again for a little while, and I just encourage you to think about a problem that you've run into recently that would have benefited if you did this. Right? What have you gone through recently, or what kind of really big problem are you facing right now that you will try this out on, right? That you can walk in and say, you know what, let's slow down and let's do this better. Thanks for listening. See you next time.